Welcome to this channel, Stand Up and Lead. One of the challenging questions continually asked on this channel will be this: how do responsible men protect and fight for freedom? And to find answers, I and the community who join me in the comments and in the correspondence will aim at honesty, humility, wisdom, the respectful questioning of authority, the respectful honoring of authority, and fact-based reasoning and debate. We will attempt to oppose all censorship, including hate speech law, name-calling and insults, and premature judgment. We'll try to stay away from those things. So if you're making comments, follow the rules, please. In the meantime, we will be facing and handling a lot of very difficult news. It's coming out. It's like a fire hose every single day. Every day, we normal folks, voters and taxpayers, learn about new crises which are tearing our world apart and bringing it down. Some days I feel like the people of Halifax must have felt the evening of December 6, 1917, after what happened to them earlier that day. And if you don't know that story, you need to learn what it's like to experience the combined horrors of all these things which they experienced in one day. War, earthquake, fire, flood, famine, and number 6 is storm. They had all of these things in just simply one 24-hour period, all in one event, all in one day. And I'll tell you that story right after this.
To connect with us directly, please visit jeffreybotkin.com and send any questions or thoughts that you might have to questions@jeffreybotkin.com.
In 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia was one of the busiest ports in the British Empire. There was a war on in Europe, and the harbor was busy with weapons, men, and naval supply vessels coming and going. A ship named the Mont Blanc was headed for France that day, carrying over 2,500 tons of explosives. That's not pounds, that's tons of explosives. On its way out, a ship from Belgium was coming in, and there was an accidental head-on collision. The damage from this collision was minor, but it did start a fire on the Mont Blanc, and the crew rushed to extinguish it, but it just kept getting more out of control, and they found it was a losing battle. So the crew, knowing that their ship was a floating time bomb, just abandoned ship. They ran for the lifeboats, they paddled for shore, and then for several suspenseful minutes, the burning Mont Blanc drifted in the harbor. It brushed up against the pier, setting it on fire. Children from the town hurried to gather around the spectacle to see the fire growing and growing and growing for about 20 minutes. And so for those 20 minutes, all there was a fire. And then suddenly, the whole thing exploded, sending a shockwave for at least 60 miles out. And it sent black rain and iron and fire and wind whipsawing through the streets of the city. It was the largest bomb explosion on record. 60 miles away, glass windows were shattered, and glass blinded some 1,000 of the survivors in Halifax because of the flying glass that caught them in the eye. And then what happened next? A tidal wave caused by the explosion swamped the shore, and then the fire began to creep across the city. In the harbor, the black column of smoke and fire turned into a hovering white mushroom cloud rising thousands of feet, and people in faraway cities were able to take photographs of it that survived to this day. That night, as townspeople tried to rescue and treat the wounded, a blizzard hit the town. And by the time the catastrophe had played out and rippled out across the land, the count of the dead was 1,963 people. And there were an unknown number of wounded. Houses and train terminals and churches were nothing but sticks on the snow-covered ground. Sleds and sleighs were brought out by people just outside the city, and they were piled high with corpses. And so for days after the tragedy, instability ruled. Instability ruled. And that's what it feels like today for all of us who are experiencing what's going on in 2020 here in North America, here and in Europe. Now, that phrase, instability ruled, comes from the writing of a local minister in Halifax who tended the wounded and the dying. He later wrote a book about the tragedy, and he opened it with a quote by Augustine of North Africa. And the quote goes like this: "This awful catastrophe is not the end, but the beginning. History does not end so, it is the way that chapters open." And so this is how we have to look at this and what's going on with the crises of 2020. It's not the end of America. What have we had? We've had a mishandled pandemic which has been ruining our lives and our economies and our livelihoods. We have now revolutionary fervor in mobs bent on the destruction of Western society, and they're sweeping over Western cities and even now into rural towns. In March and April, many jobs were lost due to the closed economy. In June, businesses opened again, little by little by little, only to be burned to the ground by agitators. So this is not the end of America. It's the opening of new chapters in our lives. And this is what we'll try to focus on this channel, discovering and exploring how we're going to live through these. How do we handle these new chapters? And what steps will we take to enter them with our feet planted firmly on the ground so that we make the right decisions at the right time? Will we respond responsibly or irresponsibly? Will we respond selfishly, or will we slip into a kind of numb denial? Excuse me. If our goal and mission in life is survival only, our goal and mission is way too small. And so the content on this channel is not predominantly about survival or prepping or anything like that, but you can learn some good things about that from time to time. It is quite possible to survive almost any cataclysm, any cultural reset, any war, almost any pandemic, and any political upheaval. But that's not, the main focus is survival. We want to figure out how to make the very best of the situation, not only for ourselves, but for others who are not thinking about these things in the depth that I hope that you will be in the weeks and months to come. During history's great plagues, for example, those who left the cities early often escaped infection and later were able to return to the city when the plague was over in order to rebuild what was destroyed in the falling economy. And so they weren't just trying to flee forever. They had it in mind, we need to get out of harm's way just long enough so that we can come back and rebuild. So what are we going to rebuild? Now, am I advocating, everybody pack up and leave the cities? No. It may be that some of you will do better for your neighbors and for yourselves and for your families if you can dig in. And we'll talk about that in coming broadcasts. Now, in other crises and crises, how did people do? How did they face them? We can learn from history as we look back and try to figure out what they did, both in the long-term crises and in the short-term ones. History shows us that people who managed to do three things made it through to the other side of the crisis. And here's what they are. Number one, they faced the tragic reality honestly and they accepted it. And number two, they completely revamped their plans for life according to the new reality because they accepted that new reality. They could do that. Number three, they took decisive and deliberate action to put their plans in place. And, the tragedy that happened on 9/11 provided a really vivid example of this. Did you know that there were 15,000 people inside the towers who actually made it down the stairwells out of the Twin Towers before those towers collapsed? And most of the office workers, and they'll tell us, the ones who survived, they were slow to face the reality and accept it when it happened. When the planes hit, they knew something was wrong. They knew something had happened. They knew it was a disaster, but they were slow to face the reality and before they acted. They knew after about a few minutes they needed to leave the building. But once they grasped the reality of the situation and accepted it, they moved really deliberately. Now that hesitation time was an average of 6 minutes. Some waited longer, some waited shorter. Some immediately knew what they had to do and they made it for the exits. 40% of survivors actually piddled around. These are the ones who actually made it down. They confessed, they said that they were piddling around, gathering items before changing their plans for the day and taking decisive action to run down the stairs. Others continued to piddle around and procrastinate until it was too late. And the ones who left said, yeah, we could still see them around their desks trying to finish assignments, making a few phone calls, erring on the side of underreacting until it was too late for them. So the lesson we find in hindsight in all of these tragedies is what? If we can face the crisis around us honestly and then accept it as real, we can likely emerge on the other side of the crisis with a stronger community than we have right now. I'll be right back.
Please share this content with your friends. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to get announcements on new content.
We're talking about calamity. Now let's focus on the crises of 2020 for a minute. The latest deadline at the time of this recording is that American truckers are saying that they will not deliver food to cities in which police forces have been disbanded. Now, will that be your city? To be responsible, will you need to move out? If that happens, will you need to move out or will you need to stay put? How will you make that decision? You might need to move away from certain Capitol Hill neighborhoods like the one in Seattle that are targeted by the mob and taken over by the mob. Or you may simply need to dig in where you are and rally your neighbors to get involved in the work of protecting what you and they all have and sustaining it on a local level as a community, the community level. You and they will discover that what is a lot more rewarding than mere survival is helping those who need help and realizing a rebuilt world wherever you live. Now, wherever you do live, most of your neighbors have given little thought to defending their lives against revolutionary fervor and mobs like Antifa, who are not simply protesting. Among them are these really militant activists who have received training on how to destroy businesses and homes in your neighborhood in order to create terror and political chaos. For example, since 2018, Facebook's censors have done nothing to remove the language of, for example, the Red Guards Austin. It's a site on Facebook. They call themselves the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Violent Antifa Collective, and they regularly call for other masked individuals to join their revolution to form a Red Army, a quote Red Army. That's what they're trying to form. They want armed militias of young social justice warriors who will cover their faces, identify as communists, agitate for social revolution, and use violence to wipe out anyone with conservative Western or American ideas. And here's one of their quotes. On the basis of our principled United Front work, fascists and their collaborators can be drowned out, run out, routed, beaten bloody, okay, and even eliminated. And then it goes on to say, these are our principles and we aim to hold them to the very finish. I mean, they're even willing to kill and eliminate people and call others to be involved in doing this. And so what do we say here on this channel? No one can watch this passively from the sidelines. You can't be passive anymore. You can't let yourself be ordered around by the media or the hysteria of the mob or by governments who are being ordered around by the hysteria of the mob and falling for it. And furthermore, you can't let yourself succumb to pessimism. We can't just give up, okay? What I trust you find on this channel is informed optimism. The setting, I admit, may look like a country retreat where I'll be making a lot of the videos that I put out. It may look like heaven, but I can assure you that it's earth. And for the record, I'm not retreating or hiding out or vacationing. I'm not running from the city. I am building instead a rural base of operations. And I'll show it to you. I'll show you what I'm building. I'll introduce you to it. I'll try to explain to you what I'm doing and what I recommend that can be done in a community, because what I'm gearing up for is freedom. The freedom to speak, the freedom to build up a free market economy in my local community. And we've got people who are willing to rally together to do this and to rediscover constitutional freedoms which have been quietly buried by corrupt politicians for the last 3 decades. Even in our little home state, right here in the country, we have had corrupt politicians, well, we've had a lot of them over the last 50 years who've been chipping away at the constitutional freedoms which should be intact. And so all of us stand on the brink of great opportunities, but only if we get involved at the community level and then work together intelligently on rebuilding what is currently broken or is about to be broken. And so what I hope to create as a content creator here are different videos that will explore what that looks like in much greater detail. What happened in early 2020 may possibly be one of the greatest developments of the last 200 years, and this is why I'm so excited about it. We got a real good close-up look at government force, government incompetence with the pandemic, government cowardice in standing up to outlaws, and all of this weakness has altered our remaining freedoms. Yes, we know that. It has further shattered our economy. Yeah, we can feel it. We can just look at our bank accounts. It has erased our plans and even emptied some of our bank accounts. So what are we left with today? Unimaginable debt in the trillions as a country, a crippled economy, a damaged food supply chain, and the danger of future forced vaccinations. That's very possible. And of course, the revolutionaries running around trying to dismantle anything remaining that works. In spite of all this and all this bad news, there's a lot of good news. Citizens are finally realizing that they cannot blindly trust the bureaucrats in government or big pharma medicine. Citizens are realizing that public education is corrupt and totally unnecessary because we have the internet, we have one another. We don't need these brick and mortar schools anymore. We certainly don't need the bureaucratic busy work assignments that are coming out of these places. And that's one thing that parents are realizing now. And children are realizing they really enjoy it at home, being with parents and being with their children. Citizens are also realizing that the dominant media is dangerously untrustworthy and that the masters of the universe censor honest speech, and they may censor this site here. And we know that and we realize it, but we're stepping out to get out as much as we can in the time that we have. So all of this, these problems and these encouraging realities open a dramatic new possibility. If average men and women can now be responsible for themselves, and that's what I'm advocating here, very directly and very, very openly. If average folks can take back the local authority to run their own decentralized communities, then today's crisis could be one of the most positive events of my lifetime and yours. The old normal can be reset by us at the local level, and our mission at the moment is to help make our communities resilient to whatever might hit us next. And so this is your cue to stand up and lead.
If you like content like this, please consider subscribing. If you know others who would benefit from this material, please share it with them.